It says, as you are covering literalism today, could you explain the post-attributes of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? I don't see exactly what it has to do with literalism, but there is, perhaps it has some connection. Imam Malik, radiallahu ta'ala anhu, said, whoever considers the Prophet to be diminished anything by death has committed kufr, faqad kafar. This is an opinion of one of the Imams. On the other hand, if someone says that they have seen the Prophet in a dream, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and says that the Prophet told me to do this, that the Prophet told me to do that, it's absolutely refused. Dreams that someone informs you about having seen the Prophet to do this or that are not a cause for a Muslim to do anything. If they're a good dream, and if they're something that one can feel happy about, but that's all. Dreams, the ulama say, yusta'nisu biha. They are felt happy about, period, full stop. And as for being a cause for action, they are not a cause for action. And then the person asks, can he be seen outside of a dream? I think Suyuti has an article about this in Tanwir. Is it Tanwir al-Hawalik fi Sharh? I can't remember the name of the book. Tanwir al-Hawalik is the first words in it. Suyuti answered in the affirmative that the Prophet can be seen outside of a dream. But the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam he now wears a garment, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that is appropriate to the barzakh, or interworld. He's not wearing a dunyawi garment, a physical body like one of us has. Also, there's another aspect, is that there are numerous and rigorously authenticated sahih hadiths that no one says assalamu alaikum to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam anywhere in the world except that salam is conveyed to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the Prophet answers his salams. There is also a sahih hadith related by Bazzar, the hadith master al-Bazzar, in which the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, hayati khayrun lakum wa mamati khayrun lakum. My lifetime is better for you, and my death time is better for you. In my lifetime, you perform new acts and ask me about them, and I give you answers about them. And in my death time, your works shall be shown to me, and if I see a good work, I will praise Allah, I will say alhamdulillah, and if I see a bad work, I will say astaghfirullah. May Allah forgive the person who did this. For this is for the ummah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And this is a sahih hadith that shows us that our works are shown to the Prophet. It's not that the Prophet has any attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but our works are shown to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Among our works are our words. Our words are among our works. For example, if someone says, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah, a person, that is an act by which a person enters Islam, the shahada. It's precisely words. So it shows us, the hadith shows us that what we say is shown to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so this is an aspect. And in the prayer that we have, that each of us say 5 times a day at least, inshallah, Assalamu alaikum wa ayyuhan nabi. Peace be upon you, O Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. There was disagreement among the Sahaba after the death of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam as to whether they should now change this to and peace be upon the Prophet instead of direct address, instead of the vocative particle or ya ayyuhan nabi, or ayyuhan nabi. This is a vocative particle, meaning that you are directly addressing the person to whom you are speaking. So, one of the Sahaba, Ibn Mas'ud, felt that it should be cancelled since the Prophet was dead. The other companions, the ulama, the companions, were not willing to change anything of the prayer as the Prophet had instituted it, because the original basis and ongoing presumption in everything that the Prophet did in his lifetime is that it is legislation eternally valid until the end of time. And there was ijma' of the Sahaba that these were the words that should be used. Assalamu alaikum ayyuhan nabi wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And so the vocative particle, O Prophet, indicates that we're directly addressing the Prophet, and the Sahih Hadith of Basar and the other Sahih Hadiths about Salam indicate that the Prophet is shown our words, is aware of our words that we say to him, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. These are some of the things that have been conveyed by the Sahih, or rigorously authenticated text of our religion. What is the position of ahad, or single narrations in Aqidah? Of hadith in Aqidah. Yeah, ahad is a hadith terminology. I should clarify, as I mentioned last week, that I conveyed the teachings that I've heard from my sheikhs in Syria and in Jordan. And if I haven't heard something from them about a particular question, I remain silent about it. Because I'm transmitting knowledge. I'm not making it up as I go along. Hadiths, it's regardless of whether they are sahih or rigorously authenticated in terms of the strength of the individual narrators and other factors in them, are of different kinds. If a hadith comes by one chain of transmission, it is called one of the ahad, or single chain of transmission hadiths. If it's transmitted by just two chains of transmission, or the multiple chains of transmission narrow to only two channels at any generation, any stage of the transmission, it is called an aziz hadith, or rare hadith. If it comes by three hadiths, three channels of transmission, or narrows to three, and only three at any stage of its transmission, it is called mashhur hadith. And if it is multiple contiguous channels of transmission that are too many for all of the parties to have conspired to forge, it is called tawatur, or definitive established from whole groups. He's asking about the hadiths that are conveyed by one single chain of transmitters. And what we'll first talk about here is if there is no other evidence that causes us to hesitate about accepting the hadith. For example, the hadith that doesn't conflict with any other evidence in the Quran and Sunnah. If it comes from ahad, it is obligatory to accept that as an article of Aqidah, but whoever rejects it is not a kafir, but rather is a fasik, or a corrupt person. Fasik in terms of Islamic law, meaning that his word is not accepted as a witness, for example, in an Islamic court. If there are other hadiths if the hadith contains variants that are known by other hadiths, and it is necessary to join to explain some hadiths in terms of others, then we have to look at the other evidence and the other hadiths that exist in order to accept them. Can you distinguish between those who are Hanbali Zahiri and those who are Hanbali Usuli? The Hanbalis have usul of fiqh that they follow, and they published. Among them was Ibn Qudamah al-Maqdisi, Sahib al-Mughni, the author of al-Mughni, who wrote a large volume on usul of fiqh in the Hanbali madhab. For the most part, the Hanbali Zahiris are the ones that don't have any training in usul of fiqh, or in fiqh per se, and so they just go make up as they go along. Is it allowed to make mess on the socks according to the Hanafi madhab? I have to plead ignorance. As I remember, one thing that's for sure, by socks, if you mean something like a lady's nylons, or if you mean modern cotton dress socks, then it's not permitted. It's not permitted because these are not the jawrab according to the Hanbali or the Hanafi mujtahideen. These are not what is meant by jawrab, which is sometimes translated socks by the Hanafis. And thick woolen socks, the only question in my mind is, I'm not sure if I remember or not, whether it's thick woolen socks or rather thick, meaning that if you drop 3 or 4 drops of water on it, it wouldn't penetrate through to the foot. The wool would shed the water, and that don't show the foot through it. The only question in my mind that I'm not sure I remember is, it seems to me that they stipulate that the socks have a layer underneath of leather between the socks and the ground, that they have bottoms on them, in other words, leather bottoms on them. I'm not sure if I remember it correctly. I have to ask someone who can read it to you from a Hanafi text, the conditions for the Jawab. Should be in Rafi or Falah or in any of the familiar Hanafi works. So the short answer is I don't know. Is it jaiz to bend down and touch a person's feet when giving salam to him? This is well practiced in the Indian subcontinent, and people hold it to be permissible in the Sharia. Please explain. Sa'd ibn Mu'adh came to the Prophet and gave his salams to him and kissed his foot. And the Prophet ﷺ did not condemn him or object to that from him. And when the Prophet was duty bound ﷺ to condemn acts that were munkar or makruh, offensive or unlawful, haram in the Sharia. And so the ulama have deduced from that, and the ulama I've studied with, the typical practice is to kiss the hands of an alim, and it is considered sunnah to kiss the hands of an alim or a righteous person when greeting him. And this is remarked on in Minhaj al-Talibin, Nawawi's, the centerpiece of Shafi'i fiqh by Imam Nawawi in the third volume. And I think it's in the Book of Marriage, strangely enough, where it appears. But and that's the dalil of proof mentioned. And it seems like it's a qiyas awlawi, or an a fortiori analogy from kissing the foot. So if it was haram or makruh, the Prophet would have explained it to us. Nevertheless, of course, the sunnah for Muslims and what is recommended and what is tremendous thawab in it is shaking the hands of your fellow Muslim, shaking his hand. And the Prophet ﷺ said in a Sahih Hadith, he said, "La tadkhulu al-jannata hatta tu'minu." You will never enter paradise until you believe. وَلَا تُؤْمِنُوا حَتَّى تَحَابُّوا. And you will not believe until you love one another. Shall I not inform you of something which, if you do it between you, among you, will spread love between you? And he said, the giving of salams and shaking hands. The Sahaba radiallahu ta'ala used to shake hands if they were walking along together and they passed a tree passed between them, and they passed a tree on either side of the tree. They'd shake hands when they came out on the other side of the tree. So it was a very frequent thing, whereas in Western culture it's something of an act of distance. You only shake hands with somebody if you're being very formal. It's almost a put-off. So one should overcome their nafs and overcome their Western training and shake hands as frequently as you can, because that's the way that the Sahaba did. It says, "Can a Sunni read behind the Wahhabi?" This is I consider the people I was discussing tonight, the anthropomorphists, the most seriously anthropomorphist people, to be mu'mineen, or believers, but they just have a mistaken interpretation. They have a mistaken interpretation. And this is my position. I asked this question of my own Sheikh, Abdul Wakil al-Darubi, before his death in Damascus, and he said yes. And I said, why? And he said, because to exonerate oneself of the burden of the sin in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, of considering anybody to be a kafir. And in this respect, I mentioned last week the hadith of Usama ibn Zayd, not the Laythi, Usama ibn Zayd, the Sahabi, who was fighting with a kafir in jihad, and when he struck the sword out of his opponent's hand, and he moved in to give him the coup de grace, the finishing touch, the man said, "La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah." He wanted to say, to keep his, the apparent motivation was quite plain. He wanted to keep his blood inside his body. And Osama, that was what Osama felt as well. And so Osama finished him off. He gave him he struck him with the sword and killed him. He was perhaps the most beloved of all of the Sahaba to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam And he said, "Ashfaqta an qalbihi litara ma fihi." Have you split open his heart in order to see what was inside? And Osama was so floored, he was just, absolutely frightened, because that was the state of the Sahaba. When hell was mentioned, they were absolutely frightened. And he said, if only I had never become a Muslim until this day, that I could be forgiven for such a thing. This hadith shows us that anyone who has said, La ilaha illallah, Muhammadun Rasulullah, should be regarded as a Muslim until decisive proof definitively establishes that he is otherwise. Until decisive proof definitively establishes that he is otherwise. And so from this hadith, the ulama deduce that al-asl fil-aqa'id as-salamatu. The initial presumption and ongoing supposition for anyone's aqidah is that it is correct. And when you think about the words of the hadith, about the story itself, about the evidence that Osama ibn Zayd went on, that the person was only just saying it, you can see why they have deduced this principle from it. Regarding the two sunnah, Salat al-Fajr, what do the imams of the madhab say about performing these rakahs once the Fard al-Fajr has begun? Can you provide some dalil for beginning the sunnah once the Fard has begun? The dalil of the Shafis is the one I mentioned. Abu Hanifa, the school of Abu Hanifa, considers it valid if the person thinks they have time to both pray the sunnah and to catch the Fard. The person is entitled to pray the sunnah before it. And I don't know his dalil. And I'm not a mujtahid either, so I have to leave that according to my ignorance. Many so-called Salafis debate about where is Allah. Okay, this is apparently the first question. I don't remember if I mentioned it, but they mentioned this. This also is an example. It's worth treating because it's an example of the first question about the ahadith, or one of the first questions about the ahadith al-ahad, the single line of transmission hadiths. And of course, the famous hadith in the Muwatta of Imam Malik, in the chapter of manumission, or it, and it was also reported by Imam Muslim in his Sahih, that the Prophet, that someone had to make an expiation, one of the Sahabis had to make an expiation to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the first of which was, there is an order in which one makes an expiation for some things. First of which is to free a believing slave. And the man didn't know, according to the hadith, whether his slave was a believing one, his female slave. And by the hadith in Imam Muslim, the Prophet asked her, where is Allah? And she said, in the sky, fis sama. And so we could use this as an example of whether we should accept something that has come in just one channel of hadith. And this is an example of the hadith. There are several aspects to it. Why the ulama of Aqidah traditionally have not said that it's obligatory to believe that Allah is in the sky. First of all, the verse, the verse, Laisa kamithlihi shay'. If Allah was physically in the sky, enveloped in the sky is something created. The sky is something created. And if someone believes that Allah is inhabiting a created thing, it's the same as someone who believes that Allah is in Jesus. They've just got the address wrong, so to speak. But from a point of view of the usul of hadith, there is also the question that this hadith is muttarib, or there are several differing versions of it that are equally sahih, or stronger, or more sahih than it. In one of the versions, the slave woman is dumb. She doesn't speak, and she points to the sky, in answer to the Prophet's sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, his question. She points to the sky. In another hadith, the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam says, do you testify that there is no God except Allah, and that I am the Prophet of Allah? And she says, yes, I testify. And this hadith has also come with the same hadith with a different narration. And for this reason, the Imam Nawawi explains this hadith in his commentary on Sahih Muslim is that the Prophet was trying to find out, he says, if it's Sahih, if this particular version is Sahih. And it's not completely certain that it is because of the competing versions of the hadith. And the third version we mentioned, you testify there is no God but Allah, and that I am the messenger of Allah, is closer to all of the other hadiths, to over 50 other hadiths, that establish that this is the test of Imam in Islam. The Shahada, not where, and questions about where. So Imam Nawawi explains the hadith. He says that it was because if this version of the hadith is correct and the hadith narrator has not made a mistake, as is possible, then it is because that all of the idols of the Quraysh who were worshipped were stacked around the Kaaba, and they were all sitting on the ground. And so in this sense, he asked a distinguishing question, where is Allah? Namely, he's exonerated about being one of those that are on the ground, one of the other idols. Secondly, from a linguistic point of view, as a translator, as-sama, what is translated as the sky, fis-sama. If you look in the Lisan al-Arab, one of the great, I think it's about a 17 or 18 volume lexicon, it's perhaps the biggest Arabic lexicon or dictionary, Arabic dictionary. We find under sama that it's anything that is above the individual. And as-saqf, yuqalu lahu as-sama, a ceiling is called the sama in the Arabic language. So this is the sama, according to Arabic. The ceiling of a room is called the sama. Anything that is above above one is called sama in the Arabic, linguistically in the Arabic language. Thirdly, if we accept, or fourthly rather, if we accept the hadith in its literal acceptation, we come into conflict with other sahih hadiths, such as that the hadith of Bukhari, the closest a human being is to his Lord is when he is in prostration. And if the hadith were, if it was obligatory to accept each of the two hadiths literally, we would come into a conflict. Because logically speaking, if in prostration with one's head on the floor, one were closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, one would be farther than someone who is standing up would be from the sama, from the sky. And so they can't apply both of the hadiths, these two sahih hadiths literally. And also the hadith of the Mi'raj, when the Prophet was shown the first sama, the second sama, the third sama, the fourth sama, all seven samas, all of the seven heavens, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't appear in any of them. And so this is another hadith, if we accept it in its literal context, this is also sahih, and it's also in Sahih Bukhari. Bukhari didn't mention the hadith of the slave woman saying Allah is in the sky or Allah is in the sama. And for all of these reasons, the ulama of Aqidah, it's a good example because it shows why we cannot, the statement that everyone must accept an article of Aqidah that is established by a single narration, or he is corrupt. That is with the proviso that the hadith does not conflict with other evidence. If there is conflict with other evidence, we interpret the hadith in a way, as Imam Nawawi did, that is amenable to the other evidence. Wallahu a'lam. They also say that anybody who claims Allah is everywhere is a kafir, quoting Imam Abu Hanifa. A lot of things have been ascribed to various imams, and one should, frankly speaking, from just my cursory knowledge of books, Arabic books, one has to check the asanid, or channels of transmission, in everything these days. And so one should check that as to whether it's true of Abu Hanifa. Whether it's true, in fact, that Allah is everywhere, physically everywhere, nobody has said that of the ulama of Aqidah. You can't say that Allah is everywhere. The people who say that Allah is with us, it's permissible to say Allah is with us. Huwa ma'akum, aynama kuntum. Huwa ma'akum. He is with you, wherever you are. It doesn't mean that Allah is everywhere. Huwa ma'akum, the word huwa, the preposition in Arabic, is not used to denote an attribute. Al-Hawiyya la tufid as-sifa, or it's not used to denote a sifa. But this does not mean, this means a witness that is consonant to the majesty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As for somebody who says that Allah is everywhere, such a person is some species of fool. In my opinion, they're not kafir. But they're wrong, and it's absolutely is with you, because unquestionably Allah knows everything everything in the universe. And the sounder opinion and his tafweed, that we consign the knowledge of what is meant by it to Allah, that Allah is exalted above being in times and places, whether particular ones or general ones. So it's a mistake. Okay, I answered that. Was it allowable for a man to decorate his hands with henna during his wedding or on other occasions? I'm a Hanafi. I don't know the answer in the Hanafi madhab. In the Shafi'i madhab, the man may not decorate his hands with henna unless it's for health reasons, some interest such as avoiding sunburn or something like this. During everyday life, do men have to at all times keep their trousers above the ankles, or will only at prayer time suffice? Please elaborate with references from the Sunnah. There's the Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala who asked the Prophet, because there's for example, we read in ancient history, we read that, for example, the Greeks, we read about Alcibiades in the days of the trial of Socrates, that the Mutakebbireen, those with arrogance in their hearts, used to walk around, and you have to remember the economic context. A garment was extremely expensive in those days, and compared to the workday, hardly anybody owned a number of items of clothing. Among anybody on the face of the earth, the amount of wealth that each of us has in their hands is far more than the kind of wealth that the Sahaba and the early Muslims had. It's quite a different situation. Dragging one's hand along the dirt, and in the early days, which Alcibiades, it's recorded that he dragged a 3 or 4 foot long purple robe behind him wherever he went, to demonstrate his contempt for wealth, and that he was so rich that he could afford to spoil it by dragging it around behind him. And some people, among the Quraysh, apparently wore their thobes long for the same purpose, out of arrogance. And so the Prophet ﷺ explained, because there are many hadiths that indicate that the prophetic sunnah is not only words and not only actions, but also states of the Prophet. And we are commanded to have humility. The Prophet ﷺ said in the Sahih hadith, قَدْ أَوْحَى اللَّهُ إِلَيَّ أَن تَوَاضَعُوا. Allah has inspired me, divine inspiration, that you are to be humble to one another. وَلَا تَفْخِرُوا أَحَدُكُمْ عَلَى أَحَدٍ. وَلَا يَبْغَى أَحَدُكُمْ عَلَى أَحَدٍ. وَلَا يَقْدِرُ أَحَدُكُمْ عَلى أَحَدٍ. And that none of you is to transgress against any other, and that none of you is to puff himself up with pride over any other. So in general, the Sharia makes it clear to us that pride and arrogance are haram inequalities. The Prophet said, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, لَا يَدْخُلُ الْجَنَّةَ مَنْ كَانَ فِي قَلْبِهِ مِقْدَارُ ذُرَّةٍ مِنَ الْكِبْرِ. No one with even a particle of arrogance in his heart will enter Jannah, will enter paradise. And the expression of kibr in the time of the early Muslims was having a long thawb and dragging it along, having it below the ankle. And so the Prophet said, anything that is below the ankle bones is in the hellfire. Anything that is below the ankle bones is in the hellfire. And Abu Bakr pointed out to the Prophet, and I believe it's in Muslim, that he says, how about me, Rasulullah? He says, he said, do you think that my garment, because it's long, will lead me to the hellfire? And he said, and the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, you're not one of them. And so it's recommended that one's garment be above because of the two adillas, because the two dalilas or two proofs, it's recommended that one have one's garment above the ankle bones, and certainly it's more taqwa oriented. And this is what I've heard about it. I've got a few questions, I see. This one is in Arabic. هل يجوز الإقامة في بلاد السمحية أي الكافرة المسيحية? Is it permissible to reside in a Christian country, a non-Muslim country? There are different opinions by the ulama about this. Some of the Maliki scholars have written, because this happened in the times of the Maliki scholars, that in the fall of Andalusia, and some of whom gave the opinion that it wasn't permissible to even remain one single hour in the non-Muslim countries. The question arises, in my mind, the only conceptual difficulty with this fatwa arises in another consideration, which is, where are the Muslim countries? And so, in this situation where the Muslim ruler is not really available today, we have to say that we have to apply the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ittaqullah mastata'tum. Ittaqullah mastata'tum. Have taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as much as you are able to. Children hold precious what they see their parents hold precious in a general way. And so this is one of the strong. If a child sees that their parents aren't particularly concerned about the deen, then the child will not be either. And so this is one of the biggest things that one can do. Just to make sure that if you want to see how your rank is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as some of the scholars have said, if you want to see how your rank is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, look how Allah's rank is with you. Allahu Akbar. Could you elaborate the principle of tawassul? That's it takes a lot of elaborating these days. This lecture that I gave tonight and the other lectures that I'm giving and have given in the last week or two will all be printed, will be available in a printed and documented and annotated form in a work called The Reformers of Islam, in perhaps as little as 5 or 6 months. And so I will try to talk about it more then. Basically, the origin of tawassul is that the tawassul means supplicating Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through means of another besides Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There is a difference of opinion among certain factions of the Ummah today about the validity of it in respect to one particular case, which is tawassul through the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. All of the factions agree that tawassul, to say, oh Allah, I ask you, in virtue of the good work that I have done, such and such, to help me now. Such tawassul, which is tawassul through means of a good work, this is valid by all people who have treated the question. And the evidence for it is the hadith that is familiar to you all in Sahih Bukhari about the stone, the 3 men that were trapped inside the cave by the stone. The first one said, oh Allah, I did such and such. If I did it for you, then please move the stone away from the mouth of the cave. And the stone moved a little bit. And then the next one said what he did, and the third one said what he did, and the rock rolled away. So this is established by this hadith. Also, the hadith through the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or the attributes of Allah, or the actions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, any of these are unanimously agreed upon. Oh Allah, I ask you, by the fact that you are the most merciful of the merciful, برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين, by your mercy, O most merciful of the merciful. All factions agree that supplicating Allah through the intermediate of His names or His attributes is permissible. And in this vein, you could say, for example, oh Allah, I supplicate you and I betake myself to you through your love for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Because Allah's love for the Prophet is, after all, an attribute of Allah. And so that's a way to make tawassul that all who talk and speak about tawassul today are agreed about is valid. A third type of tawassul is the tawassul to a particular person. Oh Allah, I ask you through so-and-so, a living individual, for example, who you think is a holy person, meaning the dearness of that person to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that person. And this is also unanimously agreed upon as being valid, to supplicate Allah in this way. And there's a hadith, the Sahih hadith in Tirmidhi, that the blind man came to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he said, I'm blind, I have difficulty making it to the prayers, the Salat al-Jama'ah in the masjid, and I don't have anybody to lead me by the hand, through the streets to the masjid. Can you please pray to Allah for me that Allah will restore my sight? And the Prophet said that he didn't want to pray for him to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but rather if he would go to the place of wudu and nibah and would perform wudu and would go and pray 2 rak'ahs and would say, Allahumma, oh Allah. After he performed 2 rak'ahs, he was supposed to say, the Prophet taught him to say, oh Allah, verily, Allahumma inni as'aluka, verily I ask you, atawajjahu ilayk, and I betake myself and I turn to you, bi nabiyyika, through your Prophet, Nabi of Rahmah, the Prophet of mercy, and taqdi li hajati. No, excuse me, first he says, and then say, O Muhammad, Ya Muhammadu, inni atawajjahu bika ila Rabbi azza wa jal, fayaqdi li hajati. O Muhammad, I betake myself to you, through you, to my Lord, that he may fulfill my need. This hadith was considered sahih, deemed sahih, by 15 of the top hadith masters in Islam. And it's unanimously accepted among all scholars as being the evidence for tawassul through the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You notice that the words in it, Ya Muhammad, are the same as in the tashahhud, in the prayer. Ya ayyuhan nabi, O Prophet. So it also directed us to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, and this was Ahmad ibn Hanbal wrote a letter to al-Marudi, who was his main student, who recorded most of his positions from him, and suggested that he make tawassul to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This fact was recorded by a man who came 7 centuries after the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It was recorded by none other than Ibn Taymiyyah in his book At-Tawassul wal-Wasila. And he recorded this from Imam Ahmad, that Imam Ahmad wrote this letter to al-Matrudi. And you can rely on Ibn Taymiyyah's reporting this, because Ibn Taymiyyah opposes Imam Ahmad in this. He says, no, in actual fact, this is a mistake on the part of Imam Ahmad. Actually, this is a kind of what we can call a bid'ah, because the tawassul was only valid in the lifetime of the Prophet. As soon as the death of the Prophet came, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then tawassul was no longer permissible. It was bid'ah. It was bid'ah after the death of the Prophet. Well, no one had thought of this for 7 centuries after the Prophet in terms of fiqh. And it wasn't really accepted by anyone except his immediate circle and his students. Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah, the number 1 student. And as a matter of fact, we have the hadith in Bukhari. So there's a controversy over it today because of the popularity of Ibn Taymiyyah and the publishing muscle behind his books. And so there's a controversy has come today about the question. We also have the hadith in Sahih Bukhari that on the last day, mankind will see their sins and see that they have a lot more bad deeds than good deeds, if they're like many of us. And they'll betake themselves to Adam alayhi salatu wasalam. And they'll say, Adam, make shafa'ah, make intercession with your Lord for us. And Adam will say, nafsi, nafsi, myself. And so they give up. Adam can't make, will not be able to make in that day, after in Yom Qiyamah, will not be able to make intercession for them. And so they'll go to Ibrahim, the Prophet Abraham, and say, please make intercession for us with your Lord. Ibrahim will say, nafsi, nafsi, myself, I'm interceding for myself. I can't intercede for you. salam, and he'll say, nafsi, nafsi. And then they'll go to Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and they'll ask for his shafa'ah. And the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam will say, Ana laha, Ana laha. I'm the one for it. I'm the one for it. And he'll make the shafa'at al-kubra, he'll make the supreme intercession, and for his ummah and for the other believers of the previous ummah. This hadith, which is in Sahih Bukhari, takes place after the death of all of the prophets mentioned. And it shows that the shafa'ah or intercession is acceptable after the death of each of the prophets that is mentioned in this, because the shafa'ah took place after the death of each of them. And in fact, Ibn Taymiyyah's ijtihad that this was a species of bid'ah is not correct, because as we mentioned earlier, the origin and legislation from the Prophet is that it is eternally valid until the end of time, unless indicated as otherwise by a specific indication by the Prophet himself, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And so this is and in 1100 years after the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, a individual arose in the Najd, Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, and he went one step further than Ibn Taymiyyah. He said shafa'ah through the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam after his death is not only a species of bid'ah, it's not only a kind of bid'ah, but it consists of shirk, or associating others with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And through the historical circumstances between this man, Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, and our own day, the condition in which the Muslims find themselves in the 20th century, this idea has gained wide acceptance that it is shirk. And in the words of Monty Python, it's something really different. Okay, that's what I'm about to listen. If one would feel closer to God by imagining Him with human characteristics like His love, loving His beauty, light, and visualizing Him with hands or other things like this, is this wrong? Well, according to Abdul Qadir al-Baghdadi, who we mentioned, whoever worships an image like him, like a person, or imagines this Lord has an image like a person, is only worshipping an image like himself. Rather, we have hadiths that about the surah or image of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They have the hadith that Allah khalaqa Adam ala suratihi. Allah created Adam in his likeness. Some of the scholars of Tawheed explain his likeness, meaning that Allah created Adam in his full stature. He didn't create Adam as a little baby who grew into a child, who grew into a man, a teenager who grew into a man. Khalaqahu ala suratihi. He created him his full height, his full stature as a man. It's one linguistic interpretation. Other exegetes point to the other hadiths in which the Prophet was walking along the streets of Medina and saw someone beating a slave who hit them in the face, and he forbade him to do this. He said, Allah khalaqahu ala suratihi, khalaqallahu Adam ala suratihi, meaning surat of the slave. Allah created the slave, or Allah created Adam in his image. In other words, you're all human beings with this image. Others, such as some of the Ahl Tasawwuf, some of the Sufis, have said that the surah, the image that is involved, is a name image, meaning that we have names that are shared between Allah and us. That the only shared point is the name. Allah has mercy and we have mercy. Allah has this and we have this, and so forth. This is a surah ismiyah, so it does not mean a surah haqiqiyya or real life image. It means that there are names that we understand some things about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through them, and so this is a surah ismiyah. And others say we just consign the meaning of this to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah cannot be seen with eyes by anyone in this life except Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, according to one opinion. Aisha was of the contrary opinion. Allah will be seen by all believers with their eyes, according to Ahl Sunnah, in the next life. in Jannah, without how, without any kayf. Allah cannot be, is utterly beyond and utterly transcendent from any meaning that comes into the mind of a human being, because our minds, the categories of human mind, are formed from impressions of created things, and Allah is laysa kamithlihi shay', He's nothing whatsoever like unto Him. But the Prophet ﷺ defined ihsan, or spiritual excellence, as to worship Allah as though you see Him, to worship Allah as though you see Him. So the question arises, well, how can we see Him? If the eyes can't reach Allah, then how can we see Him? And if the mind can't conceptualize Allah, then we can't see Him with our minds either. So how then? And the answer is that the ruh, the sight of certainty in the human being, sees Allah from certain aspects, namely from the aspect of certitude and iman. And this is how we see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. With the ruh, not with the aql, not with the intellect, and not with the eyes. And anyway, whatever we believe, we have to remember that the reality of a human being, as some of the men of Tasawwuf have pointed out, is really imagination. The you that got out of bed this morning is no longer here. It's no longer anywhere. You're a completely different person. The you that was raised yesterday by your parents as a little child, where is he or she today? They're gone. The tomorrow that we set so much hope in and that we make our plans for, it's also similarly, it's imagination. Imagination is what connects us. But for imagination, we wouldn't have any unity for any of these movements. The paradise and hell that we're commanded by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to believe in, these are all functions of our imagination. So the imaginative faculty in man is one of the most valuable faculties that he has, because it's the only means that he can have iman through. And so Allah hasn't put it there for nothing. Yet the surah, if we affirm, take as some of the literalists do, that Allah has created man in his surah, or his image, it's a surah ismiyah, or a surah of names, image of names. And so if you form an image, the direct answer to the question, if you form an image of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then you'll have to be satisfied with being wrong, because Allah is not like that. Laysa kamithlihi shay'. So a lot of questions. Should I say only take 4 more questions or something, perhaps?
I don't know the time. As you feel is like.
Mufti of Saudi Arabia has said that it is lawful to sign the peace treaty with the Israelis. We know that to sell away Muslim land is haram. Please comment. I heard that 26 of the other ulama of Saudi Arabia signed a rebuttal fatwa to him, so let them slug it out first, and then we'll have the benefit of their ijtihads. 10 minutes, okay. Could I ask you to express your opinion of Muhammad Asad's translation and explanation of the message of the Quran? I would not take any offense if you deem this question irrelevant to the topic of the talk today, and so not answer it. It is relevant to the talk because Muhammad Asad was extremely influenced by the rationalist movement at the beginning of the century in Egypt, and in particular by Muhammad Abdu. And if you read his footnotes, he says, Muhammad Abdu says, and Muhammad Abdu says, and Rashid Rida says, and Muhammad Abdu says, and Rashid Rida says. And these are extreme rationalists. Muhammad Abdu says in his Kitab al-Tawheed that the angels, the malaika, are forces like the force of magnetism. And this is far, far from anything that the classical ulama have said about the malaika. I mean, the force of magnetism doesn't come and deliver something like the Quran to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so it's a far cry. Muhammad Asad was educated in Vienna at the beginning of the century, when it was perhaps the foremost intellectual center of the European scene at the time. Wittgenstein was there, Freud, Adler, the thinkers that were in Vienna were many European tradition. And so I find his commentary a bit too rational for my taste, to say the least. And it doesn't really conform to what we find in the classical books of tafsir. A tragedy happened to Muhammad Asad, to be frank. And that was that when he went to Azhar in the 1930s, I believe he writes about it in one of his books, perhaps it's the Islam at the Crossroads, or the Road to Mecca, the Way to Mecca. He went to the Azhar and he looked at the traditional circles of ulama in the courtyard of the Azhar Mosque, was where the traditional ilm was taught. And one of the sheikhs there told him that the traditional ilm was all washed up, that it had nothing to say to modern Muslims. And the tragedy was that at that point in time, Muhammad Asad believed it, and it fell into his heart. And he embarked on an independent intellectual tour of Islam the rest of his life. And his work resembles a lot of other European and Western people who, like myself and like Muhammad Asad, like others, enter Islam, but don't go to the ulama to learn. They don't follow the directive of the Quran. فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Ask those who know if you know not. And so they come out with books like, a philosopher. We hear the cheering news that the philosopher so-and-so entered Islam last year. And then we hear the worst of news that this year he's published his first book about Islam. And it's just far, far from the classical understanding of the deen. And so I advise you to take your deen from the people that the Ummah has relied on for 14 centuries, and to learn that first, and so then you can judge with a sound criteria the value and importance of new ideas. Must be having about 2 minutes left. Okay. That's a quick question. Try to answer it anyway, or I'll tell the answer that I have. Should we shake with one or both hands when giving salam? The short answer is that I don't know. And I guess if you really love the person, you'll grab one with both hands and shake his hands, and that's natural human. It points to one last question that I would like to raise, and that is, it's an usul al-fiqh, or methodology of Islamic jurisprudence question. And it relates to the concept in Islam and in usul al-fiqh of bid'ah, or unlawful innovation in Islam. And that is the question of the tark, or the non-performance of the Prophet by a particular action. The fact that the Prophet never did such and such. Okay, some people think that this is a proof that the fact that the Prophet never did such and such is a proof that it's for anyone to do it is bid'ah, or that it's makruh, or that it's haram. I find a hadith that says the Prophet never fasted a whole month other than Ramadan, or something like this. In other words, this is called what is called in Arabic a tark, something the Prophet did not do. As a matter of fact, in usul al-fiqh, the Prophet, having left a particular thing or a particular work, does not prove that it's haram. It does not prove that it's makruh. What it does prove is that it is not wajib. What it proves is that it is not obligatory for the Muslim to do it if the Prophet didn't do it. Jazakumullahu khairan.